Hello everyone, welcome to lecture 7 of programming with C++. So today we are coming to learn about um, functions and then what functions are and function declarations and then the definition. And then also learn about arguments, passing and then default arguments, value return and function names. And also understand function overload and pointer functions. And also learn user-defined functions. Okay, so moving on to function. So what are functions? Okay, so um, a function is like a recipe in a book. Okay, just like the recipe has the name, ingredients, and then the procedures that or the instructions to make the dish. Okay, a function also has a name and then a parameter and code that performs a specific task. Okay, so imagine you are building a house. Instead of mixing cement and then laying blocks and maybe installing windows, doors, and then you see you break it down into smaller tasks and then so the same way as the function. The function work the same way. Okay, so they break down complex programs into smaller and then manageable pieces. And then types of functions. Okay, types of functions. So here we have user-defined functions. So these are functions that you, the programmer, create to solve specific problems. Okay. So um, think of it as a tool. Okay. So for example, if you need to calculate the average of three members repeatedly in your program, you create a user-defined functions to do this. Okay. So, and then the next one is standard library function. These are pre-built functions that come with C++. It's like having a toolbox and then that is already filled with useful tools. Example include std and then you bring your semicolon, two of them, then you bring your C out for output and then std bring your two semi two column and then you bring your sqr and then for square root also or calculations and then you bring std and then you bring your two semi two columns and then you bring your max for finding the maximum value and then virtual functions. Virtual functions, well, for virtual functions, we'll cover them in advanced topics, okay? So they are used in object-oriented programming for something called polymorphism. We looked at polymorphism in our previous lessons. And then moving on to inline functions. So these are functions where the compiler tries to replace the function code with and then the actual function code to make your program run faster. Okay. So think of it like um, you copying and then pasting the function code with whenever it's called. Okay. So um, let's look at the benefits of using functions. So why do you even use functions? Okay. Um, we use function for modularity. Okay. So functions help you break down complex programs into smaller, manageable units. It's like organizing your closet. Instead of throwing everything in one pile, okay, you organize clothes by type, season, and then the color, okay, and then reusability. Write once, you write once, and then you can use it many times as you want. And then if you create a function to calculate tax, you can use it wherever you need tax calculations, okay, in your programs and then even in other programs too. And then we're moving on to abstraction. Functions hide the complicated details and let you focus on what the function does, not how it does it. Okay, so when you use a calculator, you don't need to use how the circuit works. Okay, you just need to know that pressing maybe subtraction means um, you subtract or maybe you minus. Okay, so moving on to improved readability. Functions make your code easier to understand and then maintain. Instead of having one massive block of code, um, you have clearly named functions that describe what each part does. And so moving on to functions declaration, also known as function prototype. Okay. So this function declaration is like announcing to your program, like you tell your computer that I'm going to create a function with this name. You put in the name that you want to create the function with, and then it takes this input and return this type um, of output. Okay, so it's also called a prototype, as I said earlier on. So and then this is the syntax for function declaration. You bring your return type function and then bring your name parameter. You can you can um, you can include many parameters, as many as you want. So here is an example of the function declaration. So you bring your in, that's the data type, and then you bring your name, and then you bring your parameters, and then but that will be outside the main function, and then you come and call it inside the main function, just as this example shows. And then you run your code, then you will get your output. So moving on to function definition. So a function definition is where you actually write what the function does. And it's like going from a recipe and title to writing out all the ingredients and then the steps. Okay, so moving on to functions structure. So the function structure includes your return type. That's what kind of value will this function give back. Okay, and then function name. That's what you that's what do we call this function. Okay, and then your parameter, you bring your parameter, and the parameter is what input does it need. Okay, so you ask yourself what input does it need, and then you bring your function body. Also, you also ask yourself what does it actually do, just as we are seeing it here. So Moving on to function. Okay, so now let me first break it down. Okay, so return type and function definition, some of the keywords that you also need to know is one, your return type. So this return type tells us what this return type tells us what kind of data the function will give back. It uses void if the function doesn't return anything. Okay, like a function that just prints something to the screen. Yeah, and then function name. And then this is how you call the function. Choose meaningful names like calculator average, or instead of function one, function two, and then the rest. And then three, the parameter. So these are the inputs your function needs. Think of them as the ingredients in a recipe. Okay, so this is what the parameter are what the function needs. So the function body, this is where the actual work happens. That's a gradual process. Okay, it's a gradual instruction you give it to your code or something. And then return statement. This sends a value back to whoever called the function. Okay, so you, the programmer, it sends the value back to you, the programmer. So we have our code here. Okay, so now we are moving on to parameters. Parameters and then arguments. Okay. So we are blending both together. Okay, so parameters, what are parameters? Okay, so parameters are variables in a function definition. They are like empty boxes waiting to be filled in our function definition. Okay, so this is the syntax for a parameter. So you bring your return type, and then you bring your name, and then you bring your parameters like one, two, and then so on. You can bring in many as you want. And then arguments are the actual values you pass when calling the function. They are what fills those empty boxes. Okay. So and also this is the syntax for arguments. You bring your function and then your name and then your parameter. That's argument two, and then you will run it. Okay, so these are different types of arguments. Okay, so we have um, reference argument. That's when you pass a reference to a variable. And then pointers argument. We already looked at pointers in our previous lesson. And then the pointers argument is when you pass the memory address. Okay, so and then we have array as argument. That's when you pass an entire array. Okay, so we are moving on to default argument. So default arguments, um, you see sometimes you want to make a function flexible. Default arguments let you provide default values for parameters. So users don't always have to, let's say, provide every argument. Okay, so and also this is the syntax for writing arguments. You bring your return type and then function, and then you bring your name and then you bring your parameters. and then also default argument to default argument. Okay, so as this is some of the this is an example of default argument. Okay, so you bring your data type and then you bring your function name, then you bring your parameters. So here int x, int y equals 20 are my parameters. Okay, then you bring your return type. So we are moving on to calling a function. So how do we call a function? To use a function, you call it by its name followed by parentheses and then they are also required arguments. Okay, it's like calling someone's name to get their attention. Okay, so let's move on to function overloading. Function overloading is a powerful feature that lets you create multiple functions with the same name but different parameters. It's like having multiple tools with the same name but different purposes. Okay. And then this is some example of function overloading. This is a code for function overloading. Okay. So this is the end of our lecture 7 of our programming with C++, and I will advise you to do more examples and